Am I really going to rewrite an anime classic? Yeah, I'm going to spoil various scenes for the second half of the show, so if you stopped watching after episode 25, well, it doesn't really matter. It should have ended then, in all honesty, though it has some interesting moments. I'm still going to give a spoiler warning for later things. At first, I was thinking for this rewrite, what if Light collected miniatures to represent his god complex? When I realized, wait, that's kind of what Nier does? But first, I remembered that Light doesn't have hobbies or interests or anything outside of his goals. Whether it's the goal of protecting his powers Kira or the goal of catching the newest Kira, he ignores everything else in his life no matter what. Because everyone is an object for Light to use or defeat. If his loyal pawns end up going against his plan, then that's their fault for failing him and not his for putting them in dangerous situations in the first place. Like, spoilers. Geez, Dad, if you're gonna die me now from not killing Blondie when I told you, you could have at least helped me finish the job. But the show never fully takes him to task for his egotism. If anything, he's better without having to concern himself with people. His biggest losses are because of someone else's mistakes. Yet his true misstep was the moment he arrogantly believed he could become a god. He committed to his goal at the cost of dozens of lives and has to rub his victories in his opponents' faces. And he gets too many victories. The show wants to portray the battle between Kira and Elle as a chess match, but it really isn't. It's a single-player video game where Light is a player while everyone else is computer-controlled, especially how games are rigged so that the player can eventually win. An agent trailed him to see if he's the guy who controls criminals using their names, but a criminal suddenly attacks people in front of him, and Light asks the agent for ID, and he gives it. This lets Light kill him and other agents, and then an ex-agent who was so close to avenging them just so happened to run into Light, which let him kill her by convincing her to give him ID because Ryuk gave away that she lied about her name. I suppose he needed those lucky breaks because the price of failure was too high, but there could have been room for smaller stake losses while fulfilling his ultimate plan. Hold on, did Light actually have a plan? Or was it simply, step 1, kill baddies, step 2, kill anyone who stops me from killing baddies, step 3, rule as God? Yeah, he was going to threaten world leaders into submission, but how'd he sustain that? Did he realize he'd need an heir to continue the work of Kira after he eventually dies? Is it time to realize Light wasn't as smart as he thought? Light is high intellect, low wisdom. Intellect is school smarts. Wisdom is street smarts. Rigging your desk to explode when someone steals the Death Note is intelligent. Actually doing that isn't wise. If anyone asks, I just wanted to protect my privacy. Well, tell that to the fire department after you burn your family's house down. Bombing your home definitely makes you suspicious. It only seemed clever to the teenage audience, and shonen anime really likes building their protagonists to be the coolest guy ever when they're just high schoolers. I know it's a power fantasy, but I want to challenge characters. So with Kirito, in my SAO rewrite, I revealed how he's a traumatized boy who needs therapy, but Light, we gotta admit that he's a big baby who needs to be taken off his high horse before I get started on this rewrite that I've been avoiding. Remember that time Light got a message from Elle saying, "This is a global broadcast from the best detective ever here to say that Kira is a big baby." And Light goes, "I'm not a big baby, die!" So he kills him. But then a different Elle is all like, "Hey, that wasn't the real Elle, but I am. And this was only aired in one part of Japan, so I know where to find you now. And since you took the obvious bait, I know for certain that you are, in fact, a big baby." And he is. He's so immature that I don't think he knows why crime happens. Light kills so many convicts and they're just bad people for him to kill. Rarely do we hear who they are and what they did. They aren't humans with complex reasons for their actions. Plus, when a new Kira kills people who don't contribute to society, Light's only bothered by that because that was supposed to be implemented later. He never wanted to make the world better. He simply wanted the power to kill undesirables. Good thing his plan could never work. In the story, crime decreases by 70%, but money, that common motivator for crime, is never his concern. Poverty would kill and hurt millions all the same. His new world would just be our current world. A failure. Plus, I don't need to think about what would happen if Kira won, because a better place exists. So Light was always going to die alone and unceremoniously. He'd make a mistake, get caught, and Ryuk would end him before moving on to the next source of entertainment. Misa is the only person to mourn his death, but even then the story struggles to view women as people, so I guess he really has no one. You know what, let's talk about how the story handles women. Anybody remember what happened to Light's sister? Or her name? Or her existence? Because her and Mom are left to stew in their grief while the men interact with the plot. And, spoilers, every other named woman in the story dies except one minor lady. Yes, a lot of men die, but it's clear that the creators care the least about the women since they contribute so little. Now it's time to change things by looking at Misa. Misa is mostly defined as Kira's fangirl because he avenged her parents. That's pretty much it for her personality motivations. She's only a new complication in Light's fight against L, only a vapid girl with a few moments of usefulness. And she doesn't even seem to have any opinions about killing baddies to make the world good. So what if she actually had more fleshed out ambivalence towards Kira's goal? Maybe she also wants to improve the world and thinks she can use Kira to do that. But what if Misa never had a Death Note? It'd mean that if she met Light, it wouldn't be due to fanaticism and magic, but her wit. Plus, I saw fan art of her quoting Legally Blonde, and I am living for that interpretation, like her using frilly Lolita fashion to hide recording devices and Swiss Army knives. She's not trying to win the game between Elle and Kira, but playing something else with its own rules. I'd compare her to Irene Adler, but people tend to forget that she was an average woman trying to get by, which is how she outsmarts Sherlock, and not a vixen that has to have some competency, if only so that when Sherlock bests her, he looks cool. Speaking of men stuck in their own heads, who is Light as a person? In the end of the anime, there's a scene where the dying Kira, the bleeding god, passes by Light Yagami, the student with a bright future ahead of him. It's clear that moment is supposed to say, if he didn't get the Death Note and try to be divine, he wouldn't be suffering like this. But is this true? Would he be able to find happiness? Hey, how often did we actually see Light attending college? There's orientation, the tennis match, and then Elle telling him that Misa is a suspect before Light becomes a full detective. I bring this up because I don't think he'd emotionally survive college. Why would anyone be Light's friend? All he has is good grades and basic etiquette. I'm pretty sure his high school pals treated him like a free tutor. And since he went to a prestigious college, he'd no longer be the smartest person at school, so basically he'd be a friendless loser. I mean, in the story, he can just summon friend groups and dates, but we never see why they'd like him or how he maintains connections if he never talks with them. His social life should be a wreck, and I want to discuss that. Speaking of his relationship to others, he has a lot of narrative foils. Teru is Kira, but worse. Elle is Kira if he was against murder, and these two are parts of Elle. But then there's Takada. She looks like him, has a similar name, and is also well educated. Hey, what if the two of them dating in college never happened? He turned her down. He'd had enough of pretending to care about someone else, and he never would care. Why bother with those less than him any longer? But some part of him thinks, what if she was his equal? What if she was just as clever and ruthless as him? What if she could see through his lies? And that's what I'm getting at. How Light's persona of a well-mannered genius is something he has to carefully maintain. And under that is a contradicting mess of paranoia and hubris. Seeing that come to light in the end, making him flounder to save himself, is satisfying. But what if he was needed about it more? Ryuk is mostly in the story for the audience's sake, to give someone Light to talk to, but Do you think Light needs someone to notice his genius to make it worth it? Only an insecure person would need to assert how much of a rational big boy he is to the world. I'm pretty sure Light's biggest fears are being inadequate, vulnerable, and pathetic. That's why he hates his and others' humanity. It's fallible. Did Light forget that he'd inevitably die, Shinigami eyes or not, since he's not actually a god? I think he did. In the ending, spoilers, Matsuda screams at him for letting his dad die, and Light doesn't recognize his own father's name. Because Light wanted to forget that he came from a mere mortal and was immediately shot, both as vengeance for the man who meant so much to everyone, and to remind him of his mortality. I think Light wanted to be like his dad at some point. That would explain his obsession with justice while having a very warped view in it that only a pig would have. And Matsuda can also be a foil as he's the true heir to the sense of justice that Light's dad had. Maybe Takada dates him, then Miss tries to get Light to date her out of jealousy. I don't think he'd be interested though. Light is the undefeated champion of all he does. Then L comes along to finally challenge him, and Light has to destroy him because Light has to win. Every tale starring two similar opponents with conflicting goals that cause an obsessive chase to defeat the other is kind of homoerotic. Basically, I don't think Light tepidly looks at pinup magazines to seem normal Yagami is straight. Anyway, the most interesting way to rewrite Death Note is to not have the Death Note. By taking that weapon out of his repertoire, he has only his charisma and wit, making him improvise social strategies instead of giving him time for complicated plans. Remember back when he had to convince the ex-agent to trust him after just meeting her? It was tense because she could have gotten suspicious of him and left to give the police evidence against him at any point. The setting can go two ways. One, there are no supernatural elements, so he knows he can't literally become God. Instead, he extends his connections to manipulate his way into global power. Or two, lean more into magic by making his goal to control the gods. Maybe kill one to threaten the pantheon, maybe outsmart them to steal their divinity. Knowing he had a more thought out plan makes his defeat all the more satisfying. Sadly, I don't think I'm going to make this full rewrite anytime soon since I have enough works in progress that I'm struggling with. Need to stop making promises during the pandemic. I had a hard enough time editing this script, there were so many tangents. Anyway, like, comment, and subscribe if you want other people to see this thing, and if you want more things like this. Bye.